to have you all join. The opening question that I want to start with, just to get some thoughts flowing for what we're going to look at today, is many of you, if not all of you, are going to be at a Seder soon enough in the next couple of days. So when you think about the Seder and you're reading from the Haggadah, you're going through everything, what is your favorite part of the Seder? You can put it in the chat, you can raise a hand, but what is your favorite part of the Seder?
The getting together of the families.
Being together with everyone. Nice. Yeah, Ben?
Thank you, Rabbi. To me, it's this sense of this event having happened the same or sort of the same one all over the world right now, or time zones wise, but going back thousands of years, the same thing. And that seems kind of amazing to me.
Right. So the tradition, right, that's carried over time, and also both like across time for a long time, but then also across space, right? In the same moment, in the same time frame, people around the world are doing something very, very similar to each other. Yes, very cool. But that question, I'm gonna pick that back up. How much have we been doing for how long in the Seder? Merle, you want to say something? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, and it's tradition again. It's using my grandmother's and my mother's and some dear family friends and other family recipes over and over again. We keep finding more, and that it's like having them at the table with us.
Yeah, absolutely. What about any rituals, like particular moments in the Seder that you're like, I really like when we get to this? Rebecca?
My strongest memories were as a child. So the ritual of finding the matzah was always fun. Opening the door for Elijah was always interesting, a little bit scary as a child, but more than anything was feeling the pressure, or I don't know what you would call it when I was a kid, because we didn't have words like stress back then, is trying to memorize the 4 questions. And
okay, so a lot of like anticipation, a lot of, but then also feeling the pressure of, okay, this is like, I'm on for this. I think there was one joke because the traditional, you go around the room and each person reads a paragraph from the Haggadah, that, the strategy of trying to game out like, okay, I think I'm 6 paragraphs, and you want to read ahead so you can practice, right? But wanting to make sure that you're going to get it right, that you're going to get the ritual right. Great. What else? All right, cool.
I'm sorry, Rabbi, the moror. I love the taste of that. And I was going to talk about recipes. We had somebody used to make like a Middle Eastern style. It was just so good. I'm looking forward to that.
Nice. Yeah, Brad, you have a hand raised?
Yeah, Rabbi, we have a large crowd, and every year we pause and we have a discussion during the Seder about the meaning of the holiday for us. And every year, different points are raised. It's going to be very interesting to see how that goes this year. But for me, that's always the highlight of the evening.
Exactly right. The conversations, the dialogue, because that's such a huge part of what the Seder is meant to be. It's meant to be a conversation, right? We're supposed to ask questions and think more deeply. And so it's always interesting to see what people come up with and want to share. Nice. All right, great. So even if you didn't answer the question, I hope you were just like thinking a little bit about what you experience with the Seder, what you enjoy about the Seder. So what I wanted to do today was, I know this is Torah study and we were doing Parshat Shavuah, but I thought it would be okay if we brought some Passover text in just to get us thinking for Seder, because when we come to the Seder, I think it's really nice when we kind of I'm giving you the tools to be incredibly learned, incredibly articulate. You're going to know all this backstory about the Seder. You're going to be the smartest. You are already going to be the smartest people there. And the addition of Miriam's cup, that's a great comment as well, a great point as well, like the things we add over time to the Seder. So what I want us to look at is something from the Talmud. So this is from Bavli Pesachim, which is the Babylonian Talmud, the section that's talking about Passover. So some of it is talking about the Passover offering, some of it's talking about the Passover story, but a lot of it is talking about the Seder. And so it's a really interesting text to look at. So this would have been written, let's say, 1,500 years ago. And there are some things that are like copy and pastes of things that we see in the Haggadah today. And then there are other things that have clearly changed, have been added, been adapted a bit over time. But you're also seeing the conversation between the rabbis as they're figuring out, how do we put together a Seder? What are the important things that we do, and how do we do them correctly so that we can celebrate this really important mitzvah? So I'm going to share on the screen. This is from Pesachim, and I kind of wanted us to peruse, if you will. So we'll go through kind of different particular issues and just talk about like what is going on, what's different, what's the same, and how might this also add to our Passover experience, right? Like how maybe does this interpretation or how does this perspective add to how we're going to celebrate Passover in the next couple of days? So we are going to start with this first section right here, which is talking about, actually, I'm not going to tell you what it's talking about, but we're going to see if we can figure out there's something that we do in the Seder that has a particular name, and this is kind of the origin of it, and we'll see if we get to that. Does someone want to start reading for us? Ravina said up here at the top, and we'll just read a couple of paragraphs. Rebecca, go for it.
Ravina said, Rav Mishahar Shia, son of Rav Natan, said to me that Hillel said as follows, citing tradition: a person should not wrap matzah and bitter herbs together and eat them. He ruled in this manner because he maintains that today, after the destruction of the temple, the obligation to eat matzah applies by Torah law, and the obligation to eat bitter herbs without the paschal lamb applies by rabbinic law. And if one were to wrap them together, the bitter herbs, whose obligation applies by rabbinic law, would come and nullify the matzah, whose obligation applies by Torah laws.
All right. So let me jump down to. All right. So we're actually going to jump down to right here. The Gemara asks.
The Gemara asks, who is the Tana that you heard say that the mitzvot do not nullify each other? It is Hillel, as it was taught in the Bararita. Okay, they said about Hillel that he would wrap matzah and bitter herbs together and eat them. As it is stated, they shall eat it with matzah and bitter herbs, from Numbers 9:11, which indicates that these two foods should be consumed together.
All right, we'll pause there for a second. So first, what ritual, what thing in the Seder does this seem to be talking about?
The Hillel sandwich.
Perfect. Who said that? I heard just a voice in the Zoom room.
Susan.
Susan, nailed it. Hillel sandwich, right? So this is when you, as we are eating the different pieces, right? The matzah, the maror, and then we get to Hillel sandwich. But when we make Hillel sandwich today, what are we putting together?
Is this the question? It seemed like these two are almost contradictory.
So that's what I'm going to get to in a second. But so today we do a Hillel sandwich that is the matzah, charoset, and maror,
horseradish.
Yes.
right? and we put those all together. So here it's just saying matzah and bitter herbs. So the conversation is, so the first person says, well, I heard from someone that the tradition was that Hillel said that you don't eat matzah and bitter herbs together. And then after a while, and then we scroll down and then we hear, actually, where did you say that? So the Tana, so this is someone who would have been like a rabbi in the same time period as Hillel, as opposed to these rabbis who were a couple hundred years later, who are talking about it now, who are saying, well, where did you hear about that? Because I heard it that Hillel taught that you put the two together, that you ate the maror and the matzah together, that you're supposed to, right? So we have this differing of opinions of what is the right thing to do.
I have the Hillel sandwich, eating the sandwich of matzah, sweet paste, bitterness of slavery, with the sweetness of redemption. Eating them together symbolizes the bitterness of the slavery and the sweetness of the redemption.
Right. So that's why we put the two together. Exactly. But here we have, right, a disagreement of what we're actually supposed to do. So they go on and they go back and forth about what is the right thing to do in the Seder. The ultimate conclusion that they come to is, if you guys had to guess what the ultimate conclusion that the Talmud came to, actually, I'll give that away. The conclusion that they come to is no conclusion. But what do we do in our Seder today?
Oh,
Right. We eat it together. So it's one of those things that didn't get fully resolved in the rabbinic conversation, but as things went on later, we then it gets resolved in sort of the actual doing of things. And as the Seder gets adapted, we aren't taught that this is the thing that you're supposed to do. But over time, that is sort of what it got taken to be. All right, so I want to jump down to, okay, so here is an interesting, now the Talmud is sort of all over the place. So this is going to be a sort of meandering conversation through the Talmud as we go through. So then the next part is sort of interesting. So we were talking about one of the important elements of the Seder, which is the dipping. And so there's an interesting conversation of why do we dip and what is the meaning? Actually, before I give away the text, I'm going to ask, when we think about the Seder today, what are the reasons that what are the things that we dip, and what are the reasons why we do the dipping? Here, hold on, Valeria. It's okay. Hold on. Cindy, I see your hand.
Yeah, we dip the karpas in the salt water.
Okay, so and what is that? And what does that symbolize?
Well, the green is the springtime, and the salt water is the tears.
Okay, so that's one thing that we dip. What is something else that we dip? Because remember, when we say in the 4 questions, why on all every other nights we don't necessarily dip, but on this night we dip twice. So what is the second thing that we dip?
wine with our fingers and blood.
That's another thing that we dip, right? We're taking the wine out of the cup to lessen our sweetness a little bit. All right, so those are great. There's actually multiple times, really more than twice, that we do dipping. But when we look at this, we have a very interesting version of why we do the dipping and what is important, what we dip and what is the importance. So let's pick this up. Rabbi Elazar said, does anyone want to read this? Oops.
Well, I'll read it. Rabbi Elazar said that Rav Hoshaya said, anything that is dipped in a liquid before it is eaten requires the ritual of washing of the hands. The obligation to wash one's hands was instituted to preserve ritual purity and to prevent people from causing teruma, food, to contract ritual impurity.
Mm-hmm.
Hands are generally considered impure to the second degree of ritual impurity, and they confer impurity upon any liquid with which they come in contact. Liquids that become ritually impure are automatically impure to, to the first degree and will therefore transfer ritual impurity to any food that is dipped in them. Rav Papa said, I have the chat that came in front of us. Okay. Rav Papa said, learn from this halakha, which requires our halakha, requires the washing of hands, that for this lettuce on Passover.
Yep. Keep going.
Oh, one must submerge it in the haroset due to the bitterness and poison in the lettuce. For if it could enter your mind that one need not thoroughly submerge the lettuce in haroset, why do I need him to wash hands before eating bitter herbs? He didn't touch the liquid with his hands, and therefore he did not render it ritually impure. The Gemara rejects this contention. Actually, I'll say to you, according to the halakha, one need not submerge the lettuce in haroset, and the poison dies. The poison is nullified from the smell of the haroset. The Gemara asks, but in that case, why do I need the washing of hands before dipping? And the Gemara answers, perhaps one will submerge the lettuce, and it is therefore necessary to wash one's hand to avoid the possible transfer of ritual impurity.
All right, great. So what the Talmud is talking about is that before you are going to dip anything, when we go to do dipping for something, we need to wash our hands, because basically, as we've been talking about this a little bit with Leviticus, right? The ritual impurity, things that can get passed along. So before you are going to start, and especially food, you don't want to make ritually impure any of the food. So you need to wash your hands. And this applies to the lettuce. So the lettuce in this case is actually maror, is actually the bitter herb, which is very strange because we don't think of lettuce as being bitter, right? But here is, this is the example that we hear. There's actually different kinds of maror that they'll use, lettuce being one of them. And so you submerge the lettuce into the haroset due to the poison in the lettuce. So what poison in the lettuce? What are we talking about? Why is there poison in the lettuce?
Grown in the ground and it's dirty.
It grows in the ground and it's dirty. Okay.
I mean, think of how harshly we wash lettuce before we make a salad.
Exactly, right. So they're not necessarily thoroughly washing the lettuce. So there's this idea that the haroset has some type of cleansing power, right? That I guess maybe because it's made with wine, so it is some type of like cleaning power, right? So when you take the lettuce, you are dipping it into the haroset to clean it. And so there's this assumption that then they're saying, like, if it could enter your mind that you don't need to submerge it, like if you're thinking to yourself, why do I need to wash my hands? I'm just dipping lettuce into the haroset. So what they're actually saying is that more likely what you're actually doing is you're taking a piece of lettuce and you're sticking your whole hand into the haroset to properly clean the lettuce, and then you're going to eat it. Sounds strange, right? Yes, a little strange. But we see this like totally different. So what are we taught right now about the mixing of the maror and the haroset? Like how do we understand that meaning today?
Well, maror is very bitter and the haroset is very sweet. So I guess it's the history of Judaism that we have both the bitterness of destruction and then the sweetness of our religious and community and continuity and the like.
Great, we got that. Panina, I saw you had a hand raised. Do you want to add?
Okay. What did I do here? 1 minute. Okay. All right. Yes. What Susan says, it's on the right track. We are meeting points in the history of the Exodus and then forward, because it's all the things that were bad. Yes, they are mentioning it in the certain dip, the way they dip in certain things, but then when you separate it, you can, if you're not doing it that order, then you're kind of like overlooking of what happened later. Like if you dip in one thing and then you miss the charoset, so whatever sweetness that came out of this whole adventure of leaving Egypt, you're gonna overlook it. So you cannot concentrate only on the bitterness and the bad things. It was a process, and yet it's definitely also a sign that the target was to get to Israel, to the land that they were promised to Abraham. So when you are seeing all the celery or things that are green, and some the fruit which is made out of stuff that grows in Israel, the dates and the walnut, the nuts, the almond and the dates, you have to understand that this whole journey had a target. And when you are dipping into certain things, you actually achieve the target. You got to it. And if you take it away, you take away from a little bit of the process of what was going on the way. And how did we get there and why we get there? So all these things that we eat, each thing has a symbol. Where were you at that moment and what happened? And that's how you decide sometimes to put them together or not. Because maybe this thing doesn't call to be so sweet. It was not so easy. So you have to look for the symbol of everything, and maybe also know the steps in history of what happened where, and then kind of like materialize it with what you're eating and what you're dipping. And if you're missing something, you're missing something in history, and or the value of something that's important that came out of all this. So that's why the I would say the pickiness about what to do and when to do it and all that stuff.
Exactly, right. Like the Seder is a highly scripted, symbolic play we're putting on. And I don't mean play in like the fictional, like or in like
it's called the Seder, things that happen in a certain order.
Panina, hold on, Panina, hold on.
I'm sorry, yeah.
That's okay. So everything that we're doing is very symbolic, the whole point is to reenact, right? To live, to experience as though we went through it, right? So I want to go, so then this
the importance is also to remind that the target was achieved, because when they're dipping into the charoset already, the target was achieved. They were already there, because pay attention, what are we using in the charoset?
Panina, hold on.
Okay.
All right. So part of what we're doing as well, right? Because we are learning about history, right? We're learning what happened and what came before, but we're also trying to put ourselves in that experience, both for us to be a part of what happened previously in history, but also to imagine because we're also asking questions of where are we seeing elements of this in our world today? Where are we seeing oppression? Where are we seeing a need for freedom? And so we're also doing it to make it like relevant and to make ourselves ask the questions for today in the world that we're seeing around us. So, right. So the next section that we get, so he says, and Rav Papa said, a person should not leave bitter herbs in the charoset for a lengthy period of time, lest the sweetness of the spices in the charoset nullify its bitterness. And the bitter herbs require a bitter taste. And they are not bitter when they've been marinating in the charoset. So what they're saying here, right, is that when you go to mix the charoset and the maror, you can't just put the maror in the charoset and let it, sit and stew, because you need to have that bitterness, that it's important that we have the sweetness, but you also can't lose that bitterness, that it's the two together that we experience together. That's the most important part of that mitzvah.
There is a saying that says there is no future if you don't remember the past.
Exactly, right. And that's what the Seder is all about. All right, I want to jump down to any other questions or comments about this thus far? All right, great. So when you go and you're sitting at your Seder on Monday night, on Tuesday night, you can say, let me tell you, everybody, about these symbols, and here's what's going on here, and here's what they used to do, and here's what they're doing now. You guys are going to be so brilliant. It's going to be fantastic. Okay, so here's another interesting section where we're thinking about like what is the right way to do maror, and why is it important that we do it in this way? Can I get another reader starting at Rava said?
I can read.
Okay.
Rava said, if one swallowed matzah without chewing it, he has fulfilled the obligation to eat matzah as he has consumed it. However, if one swallowed bitter herbs without chewing them, he has not fulfilled his obligation as he did not taste their bitterness. Furthermore, if one swallowed matzah and bitter herbs together, he has fulfilled the obligation of eating matzah, but he has not fulfilled the obligation of eating bitter herbs. If one wrapped matzah and bitter herbs in a palm net, the thin interlacing of vines that sprouts around a palm tree, and swallowed them, he has not fulfilled his obligation even of eating matzah. When matzah and bitter herbs are consumed in this fashion...
Sorry, keep going.
Oh, sorry. The matzah does not touch one's mouth. This is not considered eating.
All right, great. So this is a classic rabbinic question. It says, eat matzah and eat maror, but what even is eating? Right? That's how particular it's going to be here. So let me ask this first. We'll kind of break down what seems to be, what's the difference between eating matzah and eating maror? What counts as eating for each of those things that they're saying here? Krista can answer, or anybody else.
Well, there's an important the primary characteristic of the maror is its bitterness. It's crucial that the maror is consumed in a way that it's neither consumed too fast, so you don't actually experience the bitterness, nor is it sort of coated in the matzah to kind of nullify the bitterness. The full bitterness has to be experienced.
Nice, right? So they're saying here that basically you can like swallow matzah. I guess like I'm not sure why you would want to eat it in that way, that you would just take a small piece and swallow it. That would count as eating. But maror, the bitter herb, has to actually be chewed, right? You can't just swallow it, get it down. It's not like taking a big pill and then just moving on, that you actually have to chew it and you have to experience it. But on the other hand, right, like you can't, for the matzah, you can't wrap it in something else. I'm not sure why you would wrap it in a palm net. This is when the rabbis are very strange in what they're talking about. I don't know why you would choose to wrap matzah in something and then swallow it whole. But it has to pass through your mouth, right? Like it can't just be, you have to like experience it in some kind of way. Susan, yeah.
Well, I have real trouble with this. I find it confusing. And I don't know how one swallows matzah without chewing it. And some of the others, and then with this palm net thing. So because it is so, one, confusing, and then two, this is not big, you can't do some of these things. I'm wondering if some of this is metaphorical.
So interesting, right? So the rabbi, so it's not so much that it's a metaphor. So often the rabbis, like in the Talmud, are playing out like a sort of like the logical, taking something to its logical, not logical conclusion, but like to the extent that you could take it to, right? So on the one hand, we might say, so let's start where they started, right? That the main thing that they're trying to get at is that when you eat maror, you have to chew it. You can't just swallow it down. You have to experience the bitterness, because you're probably going to be tempted to just swallow it, don't taste it, but you can't do that. Versus matzah, the mitzvah of matzah is not the taste of matzah, but it is just to eat it, right? To consume it in some kind of way. then you get a very strange question. So then the rabbis start thinking, well, what if someone had this idea that they were going to do it in this way, which no one would do or think to do or try to do. But the rabbis are playing with this, like, well, if we have to make sure to fulfill the obligation, what's the extent of the mitzvah? Like, when does it start being eating and when does it stop being eating? Where is the line between eating and not eating when it comes to matzah?
Rabbi, may I make a correlation about that bitterness?
Sure.
I think that the Adonai wants us to experience the bitterness of the taste because he wants us to relate that to the suffering that we went through and how he freed us from Egypt and how we're no longer suffering anymore. Be grateful.
Exactly. Right. That we're supposed to experience it and we're supposed to go through something as though we were slaves in Egypt.
Yes, Rabbi. Thank you.
So now we will, so when you're eating your maror at Seder, you can't swallow it down quickly. You have to experience it. You have to chew it, right? This is like how you're meant to go through it. So the next topic I want us to jump to is the primary. So there is one mitzvah in particular that is required basically to be done during the Seder. I mean, there's like 4, but the one most important one that you're supposed to do. Does anyone want to take a guess of what that mitzvah is?
How about tell the story of Passover?
Exactly. Tell the story of Passover. And all the more so tell the story of Passover so that the next generation can learn it and can understand. Perfect. So this next section is talking about that. Does someone want to read here? The Gemara asks. So this is talking about sort of like as you're moving the table around during the Seder, basically. Merle, go
I'll
for it.
read it. The Gemara asks, why does one remove the table? The school of Rabbi Yani says so that the children will notice that something is unusual and they will ask, why is this night different from all other nights? The Gemara relates, Abaye was sitting before Rabbah when he was still a child. He saw that they were removing the table from before him and said to those removing it, we have not yet eaten, and you are taking the table away from us. Rabbah said to him, you have exempted us from reciting the questions of why is this night different, Manishtana, as you have already asked, what is special about the Seder night?
Yes. So what seems to be happening in this section?
Taking away the table for some reason.
Well, what does the reason seem to be?
To show what's different about the night.
So not quite to show what's different.
To make it different.
To make it different so that children will then ask a question. Why is this different? Why are we doing these things that we don't normally do? Right? So
I would say that this shows that some people think it's more important to do the ritual, which is meant to provoke us to do certain thinking. They think the ritual is more important than the thinking itself. So here you have people who on their own are just extemporaneously raising the question of why is this night different? And they're being suppressed and told, no, don't think, do ritual. And
it's actually the opposite. It's actually the opposite of that. So they're actually trying, what the rabbis are trying to do is they're trying to say it's not just about just doing the ritual. It's actually about trying to elicit questions. It's trying to get people to think and to understand, right? And which is really fascinating because we don't tend to think of ritual as being open for questions. We tend to think, sometimes we think of things as being directives, right? Do this, don't think about it, don't ask questions. But the Seder is actually trying to evoke questions, not only from the participants, but from the children, right? So, which is a fascinating thing, because we tend to think, again, right, you don't want, like, oh, the children should be quiet, they should be out of the way, this is important. This is actually a moment where they're saying, no, get the kids to ask questions, get people to ask questions, which is really wonderful.
So taking the table away is a reward?
No, taking the table away is just doing something strange to try to get people to ask a question. Susan, did you have a hand raised?
Yes, I was going to agree with you. I thought it was a wonderful prompt to have the child ask questions, and you could do other things too in that same line, because the child asked spontaneously then when they did this.
Exactly. Panina, you have a hand raised?
I have something to add. Everything is amazing. And if you're going to pay attention, Pesach, everything has to do with 4. There is 4 names to Passover to start with. It's called Chag HaCherut, holiday of freedom. It was called Chag HaAviv, the holiday of spring. It was called Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of matzah, and it was called Pesach, which means to cross over, to jump over something. And you have 4 in everything, the 4 cups of wine, the 4 pieces of matzah, whatever that you put in wood. But if you're going to pay attention, why those names and why everything, 4 questions, right? The 4 sons, there's a lot of stuff. And this 4, it makes a box with 4 sides that everything connects together and makes it complete. So you have a reason for everything, and you can find a reason even if you don't see it right away. But one of the things that you always have to remember where it started and what was the target and what happened in the middle, in between. So if you pay attention to this, you understand also why the motivation of why all these separations and changes, and at what place was it written. Maybe it was not necessarily. Some things were written when we were already maybe slaved in Babylonia. I mean, the exile to Babylonia, the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud. And things, whenever the rabbis were debating, you also have to remember the historical background of where did they debate it. And it could have changed that. Was there a different target? Was it achieved? And if it's not, why not? So all this thing, it's to be always taken in consideration when you're reading the Haggadah. And also, you know, the different Haggadahs are being printed in different countries, in different languages, with different situations. And even now, I looked at a Haggadah that my daughter brought home. They already have what happened in Israel today in the Haggadah, in the new one. Unbelievable. And
Right,
a list of singers who went there and loved it, and who was there. So what I'm trying to tell you is this square, I don't know if you want to call it being divided or being added to.
Hello.
It depends how you look at it.
Exactly, right. That as this, and this is also when you go through the Haggadah, you'll see that there are things that come from
Hold on one sec. Hold on one sec.
Exodus.
I gotta go cut that stuff now. I'm not done. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Hold on one second.
What stuff?
Someone's. All right. So when we look at a Haggadah, that there are things that come from Exodus, there are things that come from the Mishnah, there are things that come that came in the medieval period, right? There are certain rituals that we started doing then. And there are there are things that we continue to add, because the Haggadah ultimately is telling a story, right? We're trying to add to the story.
And if you see stuff that's in Aramaic, that was definitely written in Babylonia.
So
I
I want to
think.
get, so I see.
All
I see
the
there's some
others way around. I'm not even sure anymore.
Okay, hold on. So I see that there's some hand raised. I want to get through. I want to look at one more text. So going back to the question of the topic of engaging children, right? Trying to engage children in what's going on. So we have another text about that. Because someone read the Mishnah, the attendance.
Okay.
I'll read it.
Okay.
This is Mishnah. The attendants for the second cup of the leader of the Seder. And the son asked his father the question about the differences between Passover night and a regular night. And if the son does not have the intelligence to ask question on his own, his father teaches him the questions.
All right, we'll read this. We'll read this section too.
Okay, okay. Why is this night different from all other nights? As on all other nights, we eat
leavened bread
and matzah as preferred. On this night, all our bread is matzah. As on other nights, we eat other vegetables. On this night, we eat bitter. The Mishnah continues its list of the questions. When the temple was standing, one would ask, as on all the nights we eat either roasted, stewed, or cooked meal, but on this night all, the meat is the roasted meat of the Paschal lamb. Paschal lamb. The final question was asked even after the destruction of the temple. As on other nights, we dip the vegetables in a liquid during the meal only once. However, on this night, we dip it twice.
All right, perfect. So, and then just this last sentence here that kind of wraps up. And according to the intelligence and the ability of the son or the child, his father teaches him about the Exodus. All right, Brad has a hand raised.
Well, Rabbi, you know, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, we talk every year, we go around our table and talk about the meaning of the holiday. And I can tell you that nobody in that discussion ever refers to any of the rituals associated with the holiday. So I'm really puzzled by this concept that it's the rituals that somehow lead to a deeper understanding about what the holiday is about, because that never comes up when people start talking about what the holiday means to them.
Right. So right, having that personal connection. So it's interesting as well too. So when we go through the Seder, like when we have a Haggadah now, there's lots of like text, right? There's lots of paragraphs of this is what this means, and this is why we do it, and now we're gonna do it, and then we do it. Does that sound accurate? Yes, there's content already in the Haggadah. So it's interesting, right? So we think of these texts were written before there was a Haggadah that people were using. So in order for people to properly understand the holiday and what was being taught, it was taught through ritual. It was taught through interactive learning. It was taught by telling stories. And that was how the meaning was communicated, and how each generation was gonna learn it again. And it's interesting that you say now that the conversations tend to be less about understanding the story and more about like, how is this applicable to our world today? Is that what does it mean to people today? And I think for a lot of people today, that's more how people connect with something, when there's an understanding of how it relates to their life or what they're seeing in the world and so a lot of our conversations now at Seder have kind of shifted to that perspective in order to be engaging for people to talk about it in their life. which is important. We should see it as relevant in our lives. But the original intent was to make sure, okay, there's no Haggadah, there's no religious school, there's no, right? The information was passed down from generation to generation. And they did all these rituals to tell the story, to make it memorable, to stick with people. Like, I think you ask a lot of people who've maybe been to a handful of Seders in their life, and you say, like, oh, like, what is the charoset for? And they say, it's the sweetness, or it's like the mortar that the Israelites used to build bricks, or what's the parsley in the salt water? Oh, the salt water are the tears of the Israelites. That those rituals like stick in a more helpful way than just telling the story. But so this is what they were trying to do originally. So I want to go back to this interesting. So when we look at, here is the 4 questions in an original format. So first off, why are the 4 questions from this text, right? Why are the 4 questions being, like, why are they bringing them up? What are they using the 4 questions for? And do the 4 questions look similar or different to the ones that we do today? So we'll start with the first. Why are the 4 questions being brought up?
It's part of the service.
Well, so not quite that. So it's being brought up because it says, right, the attendants poured the second cup for the leader. And here the son asks the father the questions of the difference between Passover and all the other nights. So again, normally on other nights, people aren't necessarily having multiple glasses of wine at dinner. They might have a glass of wine, but they're not having multiple glasses. So when they go to pour the second glass, the child says, Dad, why are you having a second glass of wine? Right? Again, trying to elicit a question of, why are we having a second cup? What is happening here? And if the son does not have the intelligence to ask the question on his own, his father teaches him the questions, right? So you're trying to reach the level of the child, right? If they aren't noticing, or maybe they're not quite aware enough to ask that question, the father teaches him the questions that to be asked, right? So even if a child can't quite get to the questions themselves, we help them out and we give them the questions to ask, right? And we kind of do that similarly today, right? Like, we have the youngest child traditionally will recite the 4 questions for everybody, because it's a young child who doesn't quite yet know how to ask questions about what's going on. So we give them the questions to ask. We give them an opportunity to participate. And then in theory, we then answer the questions that they're asking as well.
All right. I have a question, as long as we're getting into the nitty-gritty here of whether chewing or swallowing matzah whole. Okay. It says on this night, we only have the meat of the Paschal lamb. And I don't know, a lamb, is that a brisket? I don't think so. I think that brisket is beef. So this is the first time I've seen that. I mean, we have the lamb shank that we use symbolically, but what is that about?
So that's a great question. So it's less about the type of meat, and it's more about the type of cooking that you do to the meat, right? So they say on all other nights, we might have roasted or stewed or cooked in some kind of way meat, right? Like, there's all different kinds of ways that we might have prepared the meat we're eating for dinner. But on this night, we only have roasted meat. We only have, and that's meant to be, right, the symbol of right, like the lamb, the offering, right, the Passover lamb whose blood was used to mark the doors, and then was later the offering in the temple. So the question is actually about how you cook the meat, because it's meant to replicate the roasted offering as opposed to a stew or something that's boiled or poached or something like that. So that's what they're bringing up.
So also into the nitty gritty, because I mean, they really got into it earlier with this, whether you, the swallowing or chewing and how much you chew. They're also vegetarians, and that was the first, I mean, that's what God wanted us to be. So, but of course, then there were the sacrifices were meat, and that was a concession. But it just seems to me, I don't know, you could follow all of this nitty gritty stuff, including vegetarians or serving salmon, which is what.
Yeah, so one of the
He
things
did.
so one of the things
Also,
that
the hard-boiled eggs instead of that also do the job.
May I just say something? I was a newlywed for my first Parshat. I was more concerned about what I was wearing, what everybody else was wearing, and meeting everybody than what was on the table. And I was so happy to be there. We just got through it. We winged it.
So there'll be, so people will do a roasted egg. Also, what some people will do who are vegetarians now, they do like a roasted beet instead of the lamb, instead of the shank bone, because it's, you know, it's red, it looks kind of like it's, you know, it looks kind of like meat, but it's still meant to be roasted. That's the main thing, that it's something that is roasted, rather than something that's boiled or something that's cooked in a different kind of way. The last thing that I want to go to before we close is an interesting interpretation of the charoset and what it means, right? Because I think it's actually, you know what, I see that we have 5 minutes left, so we will skip for that last section, but where's this? But I think the main thing that I hope, so for one, the Talmud is, if you study the Talmud, is a very meandering conversation. It is not a list of rules and this is how you follow them. It is a bunch of rabbis just talking. Like sometimes they're talking about very like important, serious things, and sometimes they seem to be just kind of shooting the shit, to be honest, right? They're just kind of like, oh, like, what about this? And what is that? And what even is eating? And is swallowing the more eating, or is chewing eating? Or if you wrap it in a palm frond, is that eating? So what the rabbis are presenting is not like a helpful code of here's how you do it. It's a conversation, because ultimately, like, how we learn as Jews is by telling stories, is by asking questions, is by thinking, what could this meaning be, and digging a little deeper and wanting to be more curious and wanting to keep learning. And at the end of the day, that is what Passover, in many ways, I think Passover is the ultimate holiday of what it is to be a Jew, right? It's the story of slavery to freedom, from Egypt right to the promised land, but also about asking questions, telling stories, passing things to the next generation, not just being dictated to of this is what it looks like, but having a conversation, seeing it in our world, wanting to then recreate the things that we're learning in our world. So what I hope, I get that this did not necessarily teach you anything concrete that you will then apply to your Seder, except that the only thing I hope concrete that it does maybe teach is to ask questions, and to ask kids questions, and to make sure that we're all learning and growing each holiday season. When we come back to it each year, we come to it as different people. We come to it with a different perspective. So bring those questions and that perspective that you can share with the rest of the people that are going to be at your Seder. So thank you, everybody, for joining. I appreciate you coming on this very windy road down the Talmud. But wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. I hope it's a wonderful Shabbat, and Chag Sameach, a happy Passover. Hopefully I'll see some of y'all at Shabbat, or maybe at the community Seder on Tuesday, but just wish it's a time of joy and family and friends, and lots of good questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Chag
Shalom.
Sameach, everyone.
Love you.
Sameach.
Love you.
Thank you very much.
Hag Sameach. Good to see you, Merle. Hello, Penina. Hello. Good to see you.